We are recording.
Greetings, this is Joy Zabala from the CITES Center at CAST. This particular webinar is called We're All in This Together, Communication and Collaboration in the Trenches. I also want to make sure that right now that you realize that all children, all pets, all spouses, or anyone else that's in your home is certainly welcome to be in the picture, or everybody's muted so you don't have to worry about anything coming through that you don't want coming through. So we're very happy that you're here and hope that you are well. So the session agenda is introductions, a very brief review of communication collaboration from the 4 C's that we talked about last week in the webinar. We'll talk with our panel. Those are the stars of today's show. Chris Bugay, Jessica McKay, and Drew Hines. And then we'll have their discussion from in the trenches where they are, looking at a quick look at resources, a Q&A time for you, depending on how much time is left, you certainly will have an opportunity. And then also be sure that even during the session as it's going on, definitely put questions that you have in the chat. And so we have quite a good backup team going with us here too. Everything that we do, we hope, is a team approach. And Leslie, whose voice you heard, is doing many, many things. Casey is our captioner. Mia is going to be taking notes, helping find those questions and things like that. So we welcome you all. So a little bit about us. The big part is the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems is a project at CAST. It's a collaboration with the American Institutes of Research and several other partners that are smaller partners. And our goal is to bring together education technology, information technology, and assistive technology for students and bring them all into an effective technology ecosystem that puts those things overlapping in the places where they should be. We are at CAST, and CAST is the home of Universal Design for Learning, and is really looking at removing and lowering barriers to education for everyone. And I think we probably all have had an unparalleled opportunity to see barriers that we've never seen before, but we're gonna get through this as well. So I'm Joy, as I said. I am the Principal Investigator for CITES, and my colleague Janet Peters. If you'd say hello, Janet.
Sure. Hi, I'm Janet Peters. I'm a Technical Assistant Specialist at CITES. I also work on the National Accessible Educational Materials Center, which is also at CITES. So they're sort of sister projects. So I work on both of those projects, and if you got on, you might have missed me saying this is a webinar with these 3 individuals on the panel that I would have gone to even if I didn't have to work it. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. And now you'll click. Janet is running the slides. Okay, this particular quote from Arthur Ashe is one that to me speaks so strongly to where we are right now. And that is, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. And I think a lot of us have been sort of doing that for a long time, but we have come into, a quote like this has really come into its own at this point. So the goal of the session is to really have a look at those in the trenches examples of systems approach for thinking and operating during this particular crisis and possibly beyond. Focus on technology supported distance learning as a major component of a system of supports, and then highlight 2 of the 4 areas that support the system's thinking. And that those are, here are the 4 C's. The 4 C's are coordination, collaboration, communication, and continuity. And we'll be particularly talking about communication and collaboration, but we want to think about continuity always. From face to face, what do we bring to distance? And then what have we learned during this, so that when we go back from distance to face, what do we hope we will continue? So from what we have learned. Janet? So the who's are sort of the consistent all across those 4 C's. And if you were at last year, oh, it only feels like last week's webinar, we looked at the what and the how of each of the 4 C's. So you might want to look at the archives of that webinar if you were not here. So we have who's with us to talk about what happens in the trenches. So I stole from Janet the opportunity to introduce our panelists. And the reason for that is because I have known and loved these people for a really, really long time, both in the work that we're doing together now and in the work we've done together in the past. I think I've probably known all of you for a whole lot of years, and it's been just a pleasure always. You have wonderful, good thinkers. So if you click Janet. And so we have Chris, if you would unmute and tell us about 1 minute's worth of who you are and a little bit about where you work.
Sure. So my name is Chris Bouguet, and I am working in Northern Virginia for Loudoun County Public Schools, although I'm not really here representing Loudoun. I've never been sanctioned by them just to speak about this kind of stuff. No, it's all going to be about public stuff that everyone knows or needs to know anyway. And I've got the great fortune of writing a couple books. I wrote with my colleague Sally Norton-Darr, The Practical and Fun Guide to Assistive Technology in Public Schools, and currently it's called The New Assistive Tech, Make Learning Awesome for All, which Joy did the preface for. So so thank you. It's great to be here.
Is that why you said yes, Chris? Because you owed me?
I think so.
Okay, Jess, take it away.
Hi, I'm Jessica McKay, and I am the Assistive Technology Specialist for the Ysleta School District, and that is in El Paso, Texas. We are the 3rd largest school district in El Paso, Texas. We have about 60, give or take, campuses right now, and that's only because we've been combining and building new schools. So I think our total is about 63 campuses that I help support.
Great, thank you. Andrew, if you'd unmute and introduce yourself.
I'm Drew Hines. I'm a technology director in Silver Falls School District. Previously served as a teacher, school administrator, and ran an online school for a couple of years. So Silver Falls is east of Salem, Oregon, about 4,000 students, 275 teachers.
Great, thank you very much. And so I'm going to turn it over to Janet, who's going to keep this conversation moving.
And this is when my dog in the background decides to to go, but I'm just going to plow forward. Ignore the dog and the UPS guy. Who knows what's happening? The joys of all of us working from home. So the way this panel discussion is going to work is that we are going to have 3 sanctioned questions that each panelist will get an opportunity to talk about. And then a bonus round, and there will be time at the end of this to have questions from the audience. So the first question is up on the screen, and it is, what opportunities have you seen emerge between assistive technology and educational technology working together? And let's start with Drew and have you talk about your answer.
Sure. In Silver Falls, we spun up immediately following the notice some tools for video conferencing between teachers. We felt like teachers needed to take the oxygen first and then provide it to their neighbors, if you will. And so in this context, we spun up the tools we needed, but with an anticipated entry point and onboarding process for families. I knew, because we had run an online school, or I'd run an online school before, that our focus was going to be on language around synchronous and asynchronous communications, 2-way and 1-way communications, and we were going to be needing to focus on families, not students. So we were needing to think about how a family member or a parent or guardian was going to work at the elbow of the kiddo, not necessarily from the front of the class in a formal way. So that shift needed to happen with language, and luckily we had spring break to tack on some extra training for administrators. And then as teachers came back, we had a little bit of a soft start because our state staggered a little bit the implementation of distance learning. We started with supplemental education learning resources, and then those emerged to notice and communication from the state that we would move to distance learning for all. And so the communication between special education teachers and classified staff was first based on social emotional learning and just the well-being check-ins with kids. And then second, to supplemental education resources to support kind of the continuity of education. And now we're moving to that third piece of distance learning. So the communication started with video conferencing, just like we're doing today. Communication in a two-way, video and audio. Sometimes you base some of those communications first on phone technologies that are going to be most reliable even now. And then if you can get the video enhancement and some of the asynchronous pieces like recordings, that's going to help people out. So language shift was a big part of that first piece. So defining it.
Drew, how many days did your teachers have? You said a soft start. Was that a couple of days or a week, or just trying to wrap my head around that?
Every state's a little different in the way that they approach this. And so I hesitate to like specifically lay it out, but the teachers had a soft start after spring break where we had the administrators with 3 or 5 days of getting them on board with video conferencing and getting them comfortable enough with the tools that they could run a Meet or a Zoom meeting with at least over 10 people and have a moderator that would support them. So getting them that far and then having the teachers enter second. And now we're just in the process of onboarding. That's a term that's maybe new to a lot of us, but you need to onboard those administrators, which was, it was like the word wall. We focused on language, the synchronous, asynchronous, two-way, one-way contacts, communication, and some of the toolsets that they needed to learn. And then we did the same thing with the teachers with videos and instruction that they could pause and replay. And now we're doing it with parents.
Cool, thank
Drew,
you.
could you just define synchronous and asynchronous for?
Yeah, synchronous is live, and asynchronous is not live. And that's the simplest way I think we were able to. I started out with the big words, Joy, like you and I've talked about before. I struggle with that sometimes. And a few of our principals and curriculum director just corrected me. So you mean live communication? Yeah, that's it. So it's just that simple.
Great, I like that. So live, like where your dog doesn't bark all day and then a second you talk, decides to bark, live. Chris, do you want to take a stab at this question on emerging between AT and EdTech in your district?
Yeah, so I work for a large school district, like I said, in Northern Virginia, and I've worked for that school district for 21 years now. And one of the barriers that I see over the years is turnover. But luckily, there hasn't been that recently, and so a lot of people know each other, which is a nice thing here because the second we were the first school district in the state that closed, and we have been closed since March 12th. I think that's accurate. I mean, I know it's March 12th, but I think we're the first ones in the state. And the very next day, we were having discussions, and when we were having those discussions, it was, who do we need to have in the room? And EdTech was like, you need to make sure assistive technology is in that room. You need to make sure special ed is in that room, and we can start planning what this is going to look like together. Similar to what Drew had said, the very first phase of this was put resources out for families so they can consume them as they want to. And when we did that, we met within content curriculum teams. So there was a curriculum supervisor, let's say social studies. And then there was a special ed supervisor that said, I'll be on that committee, and an assistive technology person that said, I'll be on that committee. And then we looked at that from all these different lenses and said, when we put these materials out, what is that? Again, Drew, you've said it so nicely, from a family perspective, what is it going to look like from all the different diverse needs that people have? Because we had a diverse population working on putting those things together, we felt like we maybe hit a lot of those needs. So that was awesome. When we were putting them together, you can imagine this Google Doc, and EdTech is plugging in things. Here are some tools that we have, and content supervisors are plugging in things. Did you know, here's some content curriculum resources we have? And then there was, of course, assistive technology plugging in. Well, did you know we have these accessibility resources? And I'm proud to say that we moved the accessibility resources to the top of every single page. That is all front facing on the website. We have a loudouncountypublicschools.org/continuity of education website, and at the top of every single elementary, middle, and high, you can see that there are accessibility/usability tools. Another way to think of it is tier 1 tools that are available to everybody. And so that was awesome. And then the next thing that I think that was particularly cool that happened is that, again, because we've been building capacity for years, and in some cases I'd almost say it's been built. Of course, it's always an ongoing challenge, but we've got there 20 years later. A lot of our technology resource teachers were aware of the technologies that are available for students with disabilities. They have owned that to a lot of an extent. So in our first training that happened to teachers, so first it was just get resources out to the public, and now teachers, what's it gonna look like? Our next phase was how can we support families in just reviewing old material? And when we put that together, the technology resource teachers had a presentation they gave to all the teachers, and they were saying, when you're looking for resources and you're putting resources together, and there was a whole slide that had resource accessibility questions that you look at when you're looking at resources. You know, do the videos have captions? Can the text be read out loud? Blah, 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 blah. And so that was also fantastic, because it wasn't special ed saying this. This was a partnership. We had behind the scenes, we were like, make sure you put this in there, but they were already thinking that way. And it was more like, is this accurate? Are we wording this right? Is this the best way we can write this? So fantastic. And then I think the final point that I'd make here would be that a year ago, our Department of Digital Innovation, which is more like the hardware side of our shop or our district, they had purchased Grackle. And if you don't know what Grackle is, it's an accessibility checker for Google, for the Google Suite. And that was a year ago. Now, most people had not heard of it. It was still brand, you know, it takes a while in a large district for kind of for people to become aware of it. But now people were aware of it. Okay, I'm making these Google Docs. You're asking me to check it for spelling, check it for punctuation, check it to make sure it's that it's accessible too. I need to check that too. Yep, you need to check that too. And teachers were finding, because this tool was relatively easy to use, they could check that. And then I know I did the final thing, but here's the real final thing that I think is so awesome. After we've been saying that message to teachers, you're putting Google Docs together, you're checking accessibility, EdTech came to me, Assistive Tech, and they said, Chris, we're afraid the message is getting lost. We're afraid the message is, hey, if you do an accessibility check with Grackle, you're good. You've got it. You've made it. You made your thing accessible. And the analogy they used, which was so perfect, was like you could write the perfect paragraph, spelling, grammar, punctuation. It doesn't mean your paragraph makes any sense, right? And he's like, it's the same thing. Where you're doing it accessible, technology supports the design. If your Google Doc and the design of your lesson is terrible, checking it for accessibility isn't going to help very much, you know? And so we then made sure that the statements that we were saying on the EdTech side and the special ed side matched that. Like, hey, what does good design look like in this new environment? And so it's been such an awesome collaborative event.
Great, lots of information. And I think that one thing that you said that just really stood out to me of like, the assistive technology and the EdTech and the information technology systems have been working together for years, and that didn't happen overnight. And what we're seeing is that, you know, that's one of the goals of CITES, and to lay that foundation and then pivot in this emergency really laid the groundwork for this to be rolled out better, right? To have those, you were already in the room where it happened, where there's conversations happening, but that was the effect of years of work and collaboration already taking place. So
Yes.
Fantastic. Jessica, you want to talk about what opportunities you've seen emerge in your district between assistive technology and EdTech?
Of course. So very similar to Chris, over the years, our SPED department in assistive technology has been working with our innovative learning department. So that's kind of our instructional technology. And that's also been where we've also been building from there relationships with our information tech centers. So that's more of the hardware, the networking, and then also with, you know, our web design, web mastery. So over the years, we've built all these relationships. So we already had this nice little foundation. So that way we all went to spring break and then we're told we're not coming back to school for 2 weeks. So then we had 2 weeks of prep, and very similar to what Drew described was we had 2 weeks where we just told parents, we're going to be in contact with you. Here are some resources. we were able to start, slowly rolling out some information to teachers. So then that way, those 2 weeks of prep, we could introduce them to Google Meets, introduce them to some of the platforms that they may, well, actually, they've been very familiar with Google Classroom, but if they hadn't had a chance to really play with Nearpod yet or Flipgrid, and it was something they wanted to tack onto or increase their use of, they had those weeks to kind of prep and look at what is online learning going to look like. So we were really lucky that we had those 2 weeks to really prep teachers. When we had teachers come back on April or right after spring break, we already had a website up and running for the teachers, and this was through our innovative learning department. And it just had all of these different tutorials about, how to do web conferencing, what's best practice when you're doing online meetings. And then also with that, because of our relationship with them, I was able to look through their tutorials before it really got up and running and online and go, hey, make sure you're putting in these additional resources for accessibility. Let's drop in these additional resources for, some SPED resources for curriculum and how to accommodate. And because we already had that relationship, it was super fast. They knew exactly where to drop it in. What was real fun though, and Chris kind of mentioned it too, was because of those relationships and their awareness of accessibility, when they were creating some of the tutorials, I remember distinctly watching the Google Meet tutorial they created. They wanted to show everybody about the captioning feature. And that wasn't something that I created. It was something that, the person who made that video had already put in there. It was like, oh, this is a feature I need to show them. And that wasn't me, that was them. And that was just because of over time building that relationship with them. So it was a nice, easy transition, at least for me. It felt like it. I know all my teachers were panicking, but it felt fairly, I don't want to say completely unstressful, but it didn't feel nearly as panicked as maybe some of the other districts in the nearby neighborhoods were probably feeling.
Thank you. That echoes where, I think this has been unprecedented and a really difficult time, no matter what. But I do think some of the groundwork pieces that you talked about, and I love the idea that when that EdTech and Infotech are asking those questions, that you're not the sole, beacon of light in the darkness, that you have other technology systems. Drew, Joy had a really short, very short follow-up question for Drew.
Okay.
Yeah,
go ahead.
My question, Drew, is as the tech director for the district, were there times when you had to pull things back together and say just a word or two about that?
Yeah, come back from the ledge, like the opportunity where you have an introduction of a whole bunch of new tools in kind of the wild, wild west. It's an opportunity for teachers to experiment, right? And virtual charter schools have been doing this for more than a decade, but they relied on students and teachers that would want to come to them. This situation is different. We're trying to push to the families that are now, in their homes and may not have asked for this, essentially. And something Jessica said really struck me in terms of the empowering the staff to come up with those accessibility UDL, universal design for learning, some of the things that if they're educated enough to say and include those and embed those into their own trainings, that's when you've won a few battles along the way. And so one of the things I came out of the chute with was with regard to video conferencing tools, because of all of the controversies going on in the press about some video conferencing tools. I laid out accessibility, student data privacy and security, and integration with the existing tool set we were using as the premises for the decision-making process. So I include a small group in the decision-making process, but we communicated those 3 bullet points, of which accessibility was one of the big 3, in the decision-making of that single product that we said we were going to quote unquote support. And then at that point, an IT department says you're not supported in something, usually it kind of trends people towards using the tool that you're going to try to support them on. And you can't whack every mole, essentially. You're going to spend all your time trying to keep things from happening. but you can empower people to use the tool sets that you support and provide tutoring supports and video training to help them use those tools in a secure, private, safe way with kids.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great follow-up question and a great answer. I love just the three, whatever the criteria is, having some criteria for this rollout so that it's not just, like you said, the Wild West, that there is a decision-making tree, and you kind of, you know, you don't have to control it all, but it gives it some structure, you know, that is helpful for people, because that is, these aren't just fun tools to be trying. A lot of families have not asked, or no family has asked for this. And so keeping that in mind too. All right, let's go on to our next question, which you all had some examples in your answers. And I think that you can expound on those of the ways you were communicating. So how are you communicating to the different stakeholders groups? We've heard teachers, we've heard families. There are other stakeholder groups in your district, and what specific communication or strategies around communication have been effective for your district? And let's start with Chris this time, and we'll go counterclockwise.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when it comes to communication, again, we had sort of adopted a phrase here that I think worked really well. And this, again, came from EdTech. One of the supervisors in EdTech said, we got to keep it tight. And that meant everything wasn't just communication, but it is specifically applied, in my mind, to communication. The communication had to be concise, it had to be precise, and it had to be something that people could absorb. If it was too long, didn't read, you know, it's going to be overwhelming for people now more than ever, right? It's got to be something very factual that they needed. Something that was really helpful, and I would think it would be helpful for a lot of people in our small little stakeholder group, meaning my immediate team, was that instead of having a bunch of emails that went back and forth in an effort to keep it tight, we made a Google Sheet and we said, put all of your questions here, essentially an FAQ just for us, so that we were all giving consistent answers. Oh, what was that question? Let's go over to this Google Sheet. There's the answer. Let's go give that to who needs it, as opposed to an email off to this one person and then a similar email off to this other person. And now I've repeated it differently and it didn't keep it tight. That was loose, you know? So then the messaging, though, always came out from the top. It was like, it's our superintendent that sends out the emails, or someone on his behalf sends out emails to the families. But then there's also these relationships. Again, it's all about building relationships, and that's where the teachers and the parents are now, especially. Tomorrow we start with new learning. So right now it's really important to be having these, okay, I know you, let's talk. What does your family need? And having that, we have a phone system that we set up through, I think it's called Jive is the service, but it's a soft phone system that is through the computer, so teachers don't have to use their own communication, their own cell phone. And then one last little thing there I'll throw in, that we've been really being thoughtful about when to use Google Meet versus to use a video. I can't always, and you say, wait, isn't that video? Well, to use Drew's words, right, the synchronous and asynchronous, if I can make a short video, because this is going to be a one-way thing where I'm just going to tell you this stuff, then let's make a series of short videos for you to absorb this information, as opposed to, let's get on a Google Meet so I can talk to you for an hour. You know, no, Google Meet is so we can talk with each other. We can have this exchange back and forth. So I can't say we're 100% perfect there, but we're learning to use those tools that way and trying to keep it tighter that way.
Great. I love that idea of, like, the tools have different affordances, and to really think about what you're trying to, what goal you have in mind and which tool would match with that. Jessica, do you want to take a stab at this question?
Sure. So what's been kind of interesting over the course of this is one of my job duties has kind of changed a little bit. Within our district, each of our campuses has a position called instructional technology specialist. So these are teachers on campus who their job is to do the one-to-one rollout of Chromebooks and devices. They're the ones who provide coaching and instructional support to teachers in terms of using things like Google Classroom and things like that. They do a monthly, well, it used to be a monthly meeting. Now we are doing weekly virtual meetings with all those ITS people. And I've always been invited to those meetings and participated, but now my role has been more of ITS for the SPED department. So now when we're getting updates on guidance and regulation and what they're recommending, you know, we were kind of doing do we use Zoom, do we use Google, which one's which? That's kind of been my role now, is to update the SPED department, the related service staff, you know, those that don't have at a campus or one campus they're attached to. So they may not be getting that same information that campuses are getting. So that's kind of been one of the roles I've been taking on, is I am now the, you know, quote unquote ITS for related services, and to bring those updates to them. So that's been really interesting. And I agree with Chris, we've been doing a lot of virtual office hours on Google Meet for our SPED teachers. But one of the things I've been finding is if I make just a quick little video, and then that way I can just point them to that video and putting up in our classrooms and just referencing back to those, that's been very helpful for us as well, because in that way they can just rewatch it. And then of course, sometimes they want to have that one-on-one, and they want somebody to walk them through and hold their hand, and we're happy to do that too, but we'll always send them back to that link so they can rewatch it independently.
Great, thank you. Drew, any thoughts on communication to the various stakeholder groups? And if you're doing anything special with families, and you guys, Chris and Jessica, can jump into that too. But just, there are a lot of stakeholders, and that might need different kinds of communication. So you want to?
One way of categorizing this is to consider internal communication and external communication. Internal amongst administrators, teachers, and classified staff, and I think it's Saban that mentioned on the chat that saying that they're building capacity with classified staff. One of the things we realized early and often, that our classified staff are going to serve as moderators in many of our, I mean, it's very difficult to moderate. I have a lot of respect for the people on here that do this on a regular basis. It's moderating video conferencing tools. It feels burdensome sometimes, and it allows for the content to come across from the teacher, and a classified staff to serve in a little bit different role and responsibility. As Jessica said, everybody's changing. Their roles and responsibilities are shifting. So the communication internally has to be very clear with regard to human resources and expectations, roles, responsibilities, social distancing when you're on campus, you know, all of the things that need to be happening internally, and that we had to stand up early. So we essentially stood up an online virtual school district of 4,000 in 2 weeks. I mean, in just about every school district in the country, this is what's happened. And it's an amazing opportunity for us to consider, because communication tools, once they're put in place, will serve to support the internal and external communication mechanisms. And the families are going to be more informed. Kids are not going to power down. Some of those things. The external communication, you know, you always start with email and phone tools. And I know we're not talking about tools, but Parent Square, School Messenger, EduLink, InTouch, Jive, Google Voice, One Call Now. You know, you need some sort of verbal phone blast that goes out to everybody, that rings everybody's phone for in cases of emergencies. And then you have to develop reliable bridges of communication that will hold the weight of truth and openness and transparency. And that takes time. And luckily, at least our school district had a lot of trust. Even with changes in leadership, there's a lot of trust between district and building administrators and teachers and their families. And so that held as long as we maintained open and honest communication that was coming regularly from a single voice in the first couple of weeks, and then from disparate school level voices in the last couple of weeks. So, and then the last piece I would say is, when we communicate, we expect an impact. And if you think of it as like a hammer, people that don't have experience with multiple size hammers just treat it like a hammer. And they whack it harder, and they hope that they make a bigger impact, and they make more of a mess. And so if it's too long, didn't read, if it's more than a paragraph, don't put it in an email. Provide it in some other form, like a video or a update. So different size tool sets, whether it be email for asynchronous, or chat that's asynchronous but expects a more instantaneous feedback. We provided recommendations and trainings to teachers, like if in terms of using these tools. We helped them, support them in getting a Google Voice set up, and training them how to use *67 so their private cell phone number was masked when they called the families. training them not to put those in a Google Meet session and call in unless you've changed the name in there so that your phone number doesn't splash up every time. Some of those little pieces make a big difference. So whether it's email, instant message, or messaging service, Google Chat is a great Slack type tool. Each of those provides a different purpose. And I think we kind of hit on that, but the idea that when you communicate, you expect an impact of what you're saying, and choosing the right tool to communicate what message, that was definitely intentional on our part right out of the chute. So we started with those emails on a regular basis. The one call now blasts once every couple of days when we got new information, big changes. And then we passed that down to a local trusted principal to communicate with their respective school communities as we're starting the distance learning phase. And I think that was a really smart thing. We started with a teacher handbook for distance learning that we produced about 2 weeks ago. That was really a district-wide effort. And then the school levels became the authors of a parent handbook for distance learning. And I think getting those two tools out early as we could made a big difference in people's expectations regarding curriculum, scheduling, contact information with teachers and administrators, as well as the technology and accessibility tools.
Great, really good information. And I love the, I'm going to quote you, Drew. This is going to be my new little tagline: bridges to hold the weight of truth. That is, it's poetic. And I think you, actually all three of you touched on this, of just the internal versus external, and really thinking about the tool to match the goal of it, but also that there's different levels in the handbook support for the different audiences. Some really good information about communication. I'm going to move on to the last formal question, because I think this gets at something that is one of the more difficult areas that we're learning about, inequities that have been there, but are really becoming glaring now. So access to internet, devices, and knowledge by the families on how to use these devices and technology in remote learning. And how are you supporting, you've touched on this, but supporting families specifically through this process? And really, if you could talk about students with just those intensive support needs, or intensive needs in general of reaching those hard to reach people. And let's start with Jessica this time.
Sure. So over the past few years, we have had a program called Engage Me, and this is where we have been purchasing one-to-one devices for students, and we are currently to where we have students 3rd through 10th grade have a device, either be a Chromebook, sometimes it's an iPad, depending on their schools. So what we did was, right before spring break, we made sure everybody took home their device. Of course, some people left theirs behind. And then, of course, that also meant our K through 2s didn't have devices, and our 11th and 12th graders may not have devices. So as we were doing our 2 weeks of prep, campuses have been making arrangements with parents during, the food pickups, or just coming to campuses and making arrangements to pick up devices that got left behind. Campuses have been doing an excellent job in checking to see what kind of extra inventory they have, and who can they distribute out to. I've been in contact with our ITS teachers to make sure if we had students that were using a device that maybe wasn't issued by the campus, but was issued through us as assistive technology, so it wouldn't necessarily be on their inventory, so they wouldn't know to look for it. But we've been in great communication with them to make sure that those students, if they left their device, were able to locate it, get it to those students for pickup. So that's been really nice to see. And then in terms of internet, we've really been any kind of information in terms of, free internet or any information that we can pass out to our families, as soon as we hear it, we'll pass it along. So, we've heard Spectrum, we were hearing some of the cell services in the area were providing, at least maybe not completely free data, but they were relaxing some of their data limits, so parents could start using those as hotspots if they needed to. we were teaching parents how to use, you know, the web browser on kids' Xboxes and PlayStations so they could log into the websites and emails and learning management systems that way. So, you know, anything we could think of, we've been trying to communicate out to parents. So if, you know, they ran into a hurdle, we came up with the next solution for it.
Yeah, that sounds like some good information, and I know many communities across the country are trying to address this need. Chris, anything in particular that your district is doing, or the idea, and really, you know, any students that need some of that intensive support or don't have access to internet or technology devices or the knowledge maybe to go with that?
Yeah, sure. So similar, we have 3 through 12 have Chromebooks, but not all it hadn't been deployed to all the schools yet. So that, and we also have many rural areas that don't have internet access, and so even if they wanted to have them, they don't have them. So but we were able to get MiFi. There was a whole system set up through again, the technology department that did MiFi hotspots, identifying who needed them, and they had a phone number that they could call to request them, and they were to both staff and to families. And I don't know how many we're still missing. You know what I mean? I don't have those numbers to know exactly. But then there was also paper packets that went out, and some of those paper packets delivered on the food buses. But so on those paper packets were activities, and those activities specifically were for students who do, some of the activities were specifically for students who are in the adapted curriculum. So they might have those more intensive needs. Now, saying that, tomorrow is when we start it's not just materials if you want to use them, it is new teaching and new instruction starts tomorrow. And some of the things that we've been talking about and thinking about, not to say that this is going to happen, but just in general thinking about it, has been the refocusing of support from a direct service model. I mean, you will directly see the student, help the student, but maybe more of a coaching model. So I'm going to help you, parent, understand how this works, and tell me what's going on in your class, in your learning environment. What do you need? Drew had mentioned the social emotional learning. Let's just talk about that for a second. Where are you? You know, how can I help you with the routine that already exists in your class or in your home to now work through these same sort of goals that we have, as opposed to here's an activity we're going to do, like you might do in a traditional therapy session. And then I guess the last thing I'd hear about collaborating with people like this is that Loudoun has had a focus. Our big mission statement is that students make meaningful contributions to the world. That's like our tagline. And that, if you look at that phrase, that's another C to add to those 4 C's that we're circling back to the beginning. It's contribution. And that now is the time, right? And where can learning really help is well, students can be making things and doing stuff and helping their families, even in their local house. What can you do to support your family? And as an educator, we can help you help everybody else. And you don't have to wait till you graduate. You can do that right now.
Great. Can I use that with my teenager? What can you be doing?
I do. I totally do.
I think I like that. Drew, do you want to tackle this question?
Yeah, it seems like every school in the nation is distributing Chromebooks to kids right now. So let's just nail that one down. For us, K2 is iPad 1-to-1, and 3rd grade through 12 is Chromebook. And although we hadn't gone 1-to-1 distributed model, we had stuck with them on carts where we could keep the breakage and other things to a minimum. I've done 1-to-1 programs, and kids surprise you about how well they take care of devices. And so I just assured the staff and the administrators that we would see very little breakage, and whatever breakage they encountered, we would help cover, which I employ some students during the summer to fix stuff. So one of those things in June will be fixing some of the screens and things that come out damaged or broken. I would say distributing, Karen Cater, my friend from Digital Promise, talks about the homework gap. And she talks so passionately about this that it's intoxicating. So it's fun to think about the fact that this has shined a light on a gap for kids that has been, we've been all aware of this for a while, but I think it's just kind of been accepted that we were never going to reach the last mile families. And I'm going to start calling them that, the last mile families, because I think language is important when you start to talk about where you're going to put those MiFi hotspots, as Chris put it. Like, I came out of the chute on the day we found out about this. I called to order MiFi hotspots, and they were already short, if not sold out, for like 4 months. I got 25 through the gate because I processed the purchase order and requisition the same day. So those 25 I'm holding out for the last mile families. And those may end up being where we drop off lunches and buses in an extension of the school. But the school parking lots are still the most reliable places to get internet, and it's hopefully close and accessible to the family. So we're gonna get the most families taken care of just by supporting them, like Jessica said, with local internet service provider information about how to get low cost or free Wi-Fi and internet connectivity through fiber or cable. Let them take care of themselves. Wait this out just a little while and let that 70% settle. Then focus on that next 20% of troubleshooting with them to get the satellite service or whatever it is that they need to get in their area, and then hold out for those last mile families to employ the Wi-Fi hotspots. And at least in our area, one service provider has one kind of school area wrangled and one the other, and then the other provider, cellular provider, kind of covers the rest. So I knew that I needed to have at least one or two for the hinterlands when we start to press into those last mile families of a kid coming down, downloading the electronic pieces they need, going back up and doing their work electronically. But we also had to provide at the same time, I know that term's loaded, but at the same time, printed versions of these tools for students. And so we've been delivering those along with lunches. And we've got a whole system and process of that. Our curriculum director and teachers have done a great job of producing anything we do online with a backup of a text print version. We can provide a packet to a family if they don't necessarily want to plug in. But as early as yesterday, we distributed about 3,000 devices to our 3,000 of 4,000 students. So it's a busy time for the IT department.
It is a busy time for everyone. And I don't work for Minneapolis, but I do have a son in Minneapolis school. So I'll just share really briefly what they're doing, because they're not a one-to-one and you're all one-to-one districts. So for those of you in the audience that aren't one-to-one, to know that this can also be done even if you haven't deployed those devices yet, but have been using them either on carts. And they did a family survey and then have hand delivered devices to families where they need that. But I do like the idea of the last mile families, because there's some that haven't responded to the survey. They're still out there, they still have needs, and to hold out some resources so that after the dust settles, you can reach out to those really difficult to reach families.
And I would say the bring your own device approach has been open. And so let the families that have their devices and their connectivity take care of themselves. And then let's focus on the rest with the devices and connectivity efforts. So in some districts, that population is smaller than others, unfortunately, but that's just the nature of our work.
Yeah, good point. All right, we have a time for, I'm going to direct a bonus question, and just one person will answer this. So not all three of you get to answer. So we're going to start with you, Chris. Who should drive the instruction in this remote learning environment?
Well, who do you think it should be, Janet?
Me. No. Clearly, at CITES, we think it's a team approach, but in the trenches, how do you feel like that should go?
I feel like it should be the learner. And I feel like that's the thing that I think the biggest change that needs to happen. And I think this is what really it will come out in the wash here when the dust settles and what we're thinking about distance learning versus face-to-face learning, is that for the longest time we've put the teacher at the center and everyone does what the teacher says, as opposed to think about the student in the center and we all support the student. And that team approach that you mentioned, Janet, I think comes all into support the learner. And so when that happens, if you really start with that mentality, then how does that change your design of your instruction, right? And how does it change the design of what am I going to do in this distance learning when I'm doing Google Meets and all these different tools and technologies, or whatever my video platforming is, even if it's not Google, whatever it might be. what is the tool, how does the tool support the design of my instruction to really support the learner?
That is a great answer. I wish I had said that. And what I love about that is that, you know, we haven't talked too much, but there's a lot of stress out there with families. And that also allows us to have a little bit of space for the reality of what some families might be going through all this. So when you focus on the learner, you can respond appropriately. Great. Drew, I have a question for you. If you could change one thing about a particular online learning product to make it more accessible, what would that be?
All right, so I think I can answer. There was a question in the chat too at the same time about Google Meet and it being the same as Hangouts. So I'll hit that at the same time. Google Hangouts Meet is still Hangouts, just with a few more bells and whistles. They even built in, just as recently as a couple of days ago, Google Meet link as kind of a permalink into Google Classroom at the top. So it's a new feature that kind of allows that presence of a single classroom room. With Meet, has a great captioning tool, but when you record Meet session, it does not capture the captioning. So Google, if you're listening, which they often are, there are forums where us IT directors promote and vote up and plus stuff up to the point where the developers do at Google some magic. And I think Classroom is a result of that. And I imagine this one will get fixed too. So we need to be able to capture those captions at the bottom when we're recording so that you can go back to that. That would be really cool. I think I put in a couple of other things in there, but I think that's the biggest one right now.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And just so our audience knows, we've talked a lot about Google, but Google is not the only platform. It just happens to be a very big one in education. And so there's a lot of tools around that. And we'll finish the bonus questions with a question for you, Jessica, on what do you hope that will have changed after this crisis as we move into whatever the new normal is post COVID-19?
My top answer was that teachers can see how easy it is to no longer rely on printed worksheets for instruction and to track progress and to get feedback from their students. I think this is a great opportunity for them to, you know, even if it's just creating a digital worksheet as opposed to printing it out, like I am okay with that, as long as they're not saying you have to submit this piece of paper to me. I'm really hoping that even if for some teachers, I think that will open up doors everywhere else. And if I can at least open it a little bit, and then that brings them to all those other experiences and ways for students to express themselves and to show their learning in different ways. I think that will be an amazing thing. The second thing that came to mind was I really like having a virtual office and virtual office hours, and for people to just feel like they can you know, pop in and ask a quick question or something like that, as opposed to, oh, is Jessica going to be available? Is she on her cell phone? Is she somewhere else? And just being able to have, you know, some hours where I can say, I'm going to be here from here to here. If you've got something, if you want to talk something out, feel free to jump in. But I think with that, it's really kind of just made communication feel more open, just across disciplines, across departments. You know, just that idea that people can just jump in wherever they need to, as opposed to feeling they have to schedule an appointment or make sure somebody's free and available. I think it's just been a really nice way to get that open, free-flowing communication going.
Great. And I think we would all nod that we would love to see worksheets a thing of the past, that we will bye-bye. We have a more robust way of doing that. So that's great. We don't have very much time, but if anyone in the audience has a question that they'd like to direct to our panelists, if it's for all of them, just put it in there. If you want to specifically ask Drew or Jessica or Chris, just put at them. And we'll give you a second. We'll maybe take one or two questions. We don't have a whole lot of time, but to know that the CITES conversations will continue. We will be offering more webinars during this pandemic, and we will be sure that you have all the connections to reach out to us as well. So I'll open it up for Q&A in the chat.
I will say that both attendees have been talking to each other and our panelists have been talking to attendees. So I'm not sure that there's any unaddressed questions at this point. Leslie or Mia has just put in the chat to remember that this webinar is recorded and that recording will be available. So we still have about 5 minutes. So if anybody would like to put something in.
There's one question from Greg on thoughts on, so I'm seeing home structures really hurting in some cases, and thoughts how to support those environments right now. So if anyone wants to take a quick step.
Yeah, they'd have to be lightning round responses.
Yes,
so.
very fast.
Okay, I'll clarify. Jessica, then you go, right? So my response there is, again, many of those kids, I was wearing the AAC hat. So let me take the AAC hat for a second, and Jessica, you could take it from there. I mentioned this earlier, but the idea is with the coaching. So much of their time is spent with direct therapy model, meaning I have to be with that student with the severe needs to show them how to do the thing with their device. And then they go home, and I think there's even some like Proloquo came out, or Systemware came out with a webinar or some stats to show how much their tools are not used on the weekends or in the afternoons. And it's because we're not coaching the parents. We might give them something to do or tell them something to do, but not really coaching them with really reflective, what do you need? How do you feel like that's working for you? How can we fit this into your day? Really a model that is based around the family needs. It's all, and I see that with a lot of the people that I see online are like, how am I going to do therapy directly with the kid? You're not. You're going to do it with the parents. Jessica?
Yep, no, I agree. One of the things that I had to do was to provide some instructional guidance for our teachers with students of complex needs. And so, you know, they were all freaking out. And I kind of touched on this in the chat. But again, you know, that lack of structure and what we did was with coaching, it was here's the lesson, but how can we do this at home? And really just breaking it down for parents, making it very simple, you know, objects that they can use at the house. So we took the high tech in terms of here's the information, but when you're working with your student, it's going to be all low tech. So, you know, you're going to be manipulating with, you know, toys and paper clips, whatever you can find to, you know, practice on those skills. But one of the other really nice things with our district is we have an amazing social worker who's just been, you know, crazily pulling up resources and getting in touch with parents. And as soon as we see a red flag pop up, you know, she's on it. You know, and again, with kind of the similar where we're talking about all those different resources for tools, we've kind of been building those resources for, you know, where is a food pantry? Where is, you know, if I need support, if I need therapies, you know, and additional help wherever they can get it. So we've just been really just kind of building up those resources where we can.
We shrink the instructional time, and it compacts our approaches. We have to be more efficient with our time. And so special education or regular ed, we're flipping. So we're trying to get more content in shorter periods of time. There should really no introduction should be more than 5 or 6 minutes of an activity. And that's a trend that you can watch on YouTube of, you know, the size and length of videos and resources. One of the most powerful interactions between a learner and a teacher I've seen is my daughter took a speech class with an online tutor, and that particular vendor did a great job, better than my daughter had experienced, in working to change their facial structures and the way her muscles worked. It was a very focused time and very efficient in the time that she spent in that experience.
Great, thank you. We're almost out of time, so I'm gonna turn it over to Joy. Great answers. Thank you, everyone. You're mute.
Sorry, now I just said why, now you know why I love these people, and we'd like you to come again next week, please. In any event, we appreciate the time that you've given us. We have some resources to share that are in the PowerPoint, basically looking at lots of different people's support for this COVID-19 situation. And Janet, go ahead, please. And on top of the start where you are, use what you have, do what you can, is Maya Angelou saying, do the best you can, and when you know better, do better. So let's look at what we're learning as we go forward. And Janet, one more, please. And here's how to keep in touch. And I want to leave you with a little Zoom fun so that you can leave on a very happy note. And that is, go to YouTube and search for the Zoom where it happens. If you're a Hamilton fan, you will love it. And if you're not, you'll become one. So thank you again, Drew and Jessica and Chris. And thank you very much to all of the CITES team that was here. And thank you all for spending this last hour with us. I hope it was a beneficial time for you. And Leslie will put in the chat where you're supposed to go to say how it worked for you, what worked, what didn't, what can be done better. So we'll look forward to seeing you again another time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the CITES Center, I would like to thank Casey and ACS Captions for providing the live captions this afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. The webinar recording will be available in about a week. You will all receive an email when that recording has been uploaded. Stay safe, stay healthy, and until next time, thanks for joining us.